Hey, what's happening? Good one, SirJames coming at you guys with another video. In today's video, I'm here to give you guys my thoughts and opinions about the PlayStation VR system. Now, yes, I did do a video like this before. However, during the time, it was only 2 weeks after the system has been out, and a lot of you guys have been requesting for more of an updated video to kind of see if my thoughts are still the same or if anything has changed. Of course, we are pretty much about 1 or 2 days away from the PlayStation VR being out for pretty much 2 months already, which honestly time flies because it really hasn't felt like 2 months overall. Now, the first thing that I want to go ahead and talk about is a general question that a lot of you have been asking me ever since the PlayStation 4 Pro was released, and that question is, if you already own a PlayStation 4 system, is it worth upgrading to the PlayStation 4 Pro specifically for VR? And the short answer is no. However, there are some noticeable differences and improvements, but it's not to the point where it's a big night and day difference. That is why my answer is no. If you already have a PS4, not worth upgrading to the Pro just for VR. However, if you don't own a PlayStation system, then I would say yes, go for the PS4 Pro, especially to go with a VR. Simple as that. Now, to go over some of the differences of what I've noticed from playing the VR on a standard PS4 on the Pro is some minor things here and there depending on the title. For example, a game that I reviewed in November known as Eagle Flight, I did mention in my review, which during the time was being played on a standard PS4 system, and that was there were some texture pop-ins for some of the landscapes, which was my only negative within my review. However, playing it on the PS4 Pro, that negative was non-existent, meaning that everything was smooth and there was no texture pop-ins, which I thought was nice, and of course had an increased resolution and looked really, really good. Another good example is games like the Batman Arkham VR. That one also had an increased resolution, and some of the text that were a little bit blurry was much more readable on the Pro version. And another prime example, I would say the biggest change overall, was a game called the London Heist, which is part of the PlayStation VR Worlds bundle. And in that one, there's definitely a clear night and day. Not only do you have an increased resolution, but they've also added a reflective surface depending on the environment and game. Like, for example, when you're having your meeting with the crime boss, when he leans over the table, when you see it on a standard PS4, the table's still playing, nothing too fancy there. However, when you see that scene again, but on the Pro, not only do you have the increased resolution, but with the reflective surface added, you could see the reflection off his tie and his suit on the table, and that looked really, really good. So again, that would be like the biggest game to have any type of initial change overall. But again, most of the other stuff is just increased resolution and just general things like that. But again, nothing too fancy there. So again, if you have a PS4 already, no need to upgrade to the Pro for VR. Again, if you don't have a PlayStation, then go for the Pro and then go from there. Simple as that. Now, the second most common question that a lot of you guys have been asking me is that can you use your old Move accessories to be utilized with PlayStation VR? And it really depends on the title. Like, for example, there was a game that I played called Pixel Gear, which is one where you have the Move controller and which you basically hold upwards and you aim and shoot as you're stationary on a platform, which works out quite well. And you think, you know, a game like that would be pretty cool to utilize something like this, which was basically a gun accessory for the Move during the time. This is known as the PlayStation Sharpshooter, if you guys didn't know that already. And for that game, not really. However, certain games, yes. And the main game that you can use your old Move accessories for, especially the pistol-looking ones, would be the game known as the Until Dawn Rush of Blood. A recommended title if you're planning on getting VR, or if you already own the game, then yes, you can use Move accessories like the gun, for example, the gun accessories for something like that, and that will work out just fine. But again, there's not really a lot of shooters out there at this current time for VR, which is going to utilize all that. I know the biggest one to be coming out next year is the game known as Farpoint, but until then, we might see some more shooters for 2017. But again, that's the only main game at this point in time. Now, the next thing I want to go ahead and talk about is the PlayStation VR headset itself. The main common question a lot of people are kind of concerned is that after extended period of use and after months on end, you know, how is it going to hold up? Is it going to start falling apart? Is the foam padding going to start tearing? Anything like that. For the most part, the padding around the headset is still maintained. I've had no issues with that. It still is a comfortable headset, so I've noticed no discomfort at all, even after the amount of times that I've used it, which I do play it pretty much on a daily basis ever since its initial launch. However, the only thing that I do want to add is the fact that on the actual lens itself within the inside, I do have a minor scratch mark. It's a really light scratch mark. It's not to the point where I'm going to notice anything in game at all, but it's a light scratch mark on the outside. So if I'm going to clean it, it's something that I do notice right away. And I think the reason that was there is because oftentimes when I play, I have my glasses on, and sometimes when you have the visor on, you kind of, squish it in towards your face, kind of makes fine-tune adjustments. For me, I have to push it in all the way. And I think because me doing that, the lens off the goggles inside the VR headset and my glasses rub up against each other. And I think that's what initially caused the little scratch mark right off the bat. So if you play with glasses, just kind of be aware of that. So I would try to recommend maybe kind of keep it at like a little bit of a distance away if possible. But again, I did have a little bit of a minor scratch on the actual lens itself. Other than that, the actual headset is maintained very well. I've had no issues with the rubber padding around the actual visor, and it still maintains its comfortness even after all this time, the amount of times I've used it, hours on end, days, and of course even months. Next up, I want to go ahead and talk about motion sickness. Now, last time I spoken to you guys, the main game that caused me to get sick big time was the game known as Loading Human Chapter 1, and since then we've had a lot more games that recently came out, so of course you guys are kind of concerned what other games that's been out that I played caused me to get sick as well. And the thing is, I think I know what gets me sick. I think it's the free movement option, where you're basically able to move around freely without some teleporting option for movement, or when you like turn your analog stick, it will turn you at a certain degree and point in the game. Like Resident Evil, for example, is one that I utilized that in my initial demo, which I'll have it linked in the description down below. So I think that's what causes motion sickness for me, but really depends on the game. Like for example, Riggs. Riggs is a fast-paced moving game with pretty much free movement. That one I've had no experience with motion sickness, but games like Loading Human Chapter 1, Robinson the Journey, and if I did enable the free movement in Resident Evil 7, then stuff like that will get me a little bit sick, but it's to the point where it's not as bad as I had it the first time around, like with Loading Human Chapter 1. But if there's any game out there that has the option to disable that and to change it to something else, like Resident Evil 7, for example, that's a really good prime example of how this should be done, is giving the players options to kind of change things in terms of their comfort level. Like again, if free movement makes you nauseous, then you could disable that, change it to something else to either teleport, or every time you turn to a certain degree, like 25 degrees, 50 degrees, 95 degrees, whatever the case may be. That's a good example of ways to make games feel comfortable, especially for players out there. So that's the only form of motion sickness I get. Again, if it really depends on the game, but if the game does not have the options at all to change it to something else, like Loading Human Chapter 1 or Robinson the Journey, then games like that will cause me to get sick and may cause others to get sick out there. But like I said, it really depends on the person in general. Next up, I want to go ahead and talk about the games in general. Now, last time I spoken to you guys was basically talking about the games that were on launch during the time. However, since then up until now, we've had a lot more games get released. It almost seems like either every week or every other week we get 3 to 4 new games added to the PlayStation VR library. So even if you invest in the $400 headset or the $500 bundle, we could see a huge library of games, and I'm not sure what we're going to be getting for 2017 besides a few titles that I know right now. But again, it's kind of a mystery to see what 2017 is going to hold up to. But one of the things I did like is Ubisoft. Ubisoft actually did something pretty cool, and they've enabled cross-platform with PlayStation VR. So if you're playing games like, for example, Eagle Flight, and there's another game I'm playing right now, I can't remember the title, by the way, but it has like wolves in its name. It's like this social interactive game. They've enabled cross-platform, so not only can you play it with other PlayStation users, but PlayStation users could also play with PC users on the VR side. And I think that's really cool, and I'm hoping other companies will follow suit for 2017, depending on the title, of course, but I thought that was really, really neat. Now, games like Eagle Flight that I reviewed was a beautiful game. It's a more of a simplistic game where you have a little bit of a story element, but you have the freedom of flight. And I thought the game was done really, really well, because in Eagle Flight you are, well, an eagle, as you guessed. And that game was really fun, and it actually had a really nice tactile multiplayer. You will think, how do you perform a multiplayer? But it's more like, capture the bait type of gameplay, which actually worked out quite well. So games like that was really, really nice. Pixel Gear, which is basically almost like a tower defense game, but again, you are on a stationary platform, and you're shooting targets that come at you, and there's different difficulty levels. Games like that was also really enjoyable. Now, do keep in mind, I haven't played every single PlayStation VR title, because that gets pretty expensive, which I do want to talk about pricing. Now, people are concerned that when VR games get released, everything's going to be like $40, $50, $60, but to be honest, a lot of the pricing is actually really, really good. Like, for example, you have your stack, a small stack of $10 games. Then you have a good medium-sized to large $20 games. Then you have some $30 games, a couple $40 games, and maybe one or two $60 games. So far, pricing for games actually are reasonable. However, there are a couple titles here and there I feel like should be lowered about $10 more. Which I'll probably save that for a different discussion. But so far, pricing for games on the PlayStation VR is reasonable. A lot of them are extremely affordable. So even if you spend all the money on the headset, and if you were planning on spending like $60 more, again, you could get up to 3 games. Simple as that. So again, I thought that was done really, really well. Now, since we're talking about 2017 as well, I mean, obviously the main concern people have is, will PlayStation VR be around a year later? And I feel like it will be. I mean, we got other big titles coming out like Resident Evil 7, Farpoint, which, by the way, I did go through the PlayStation experience. I checked out Farpoint, and that one is going to be a fun game. Even though that game, as I mentioned before, in terms of my motion sickness, it was with free movement. That game did have free movement, though I didn't get the chance to check out the options to see if I could change things around. But for some reason, that one, I didn't get sick at all when I was playing it, and I thought that one was done really well. What I like too is that even though when you're standing up playing, which is the main way to play it, their new gun accessory, kind of like this, but not as cool looking, it's more of a cheaper version of it, has like 2 analog sticks that worked out quite well. The gameplay was actually really, really good. What I like too is that if you kneel down in the real world, your character does that in game. You don't have to push a button, you just physically kneel down, your character does it. When you want to look down the sights, you just have the gun in front of you, you can look down the sights. So that game was done pretty well. And the other main game that I really, really enjoyed was the Resident Evil 7 demo. Ever since the last update, they've enabled the PlayStation VR support. And I'm going to say this right off the bat, even though the game's technically not out yet, so I'm kind of just mentioning stuff here, but it's my prediction. But if Resident Evil 7 is really, really good in terms of the overall game itself, then I feel like it's going to be one of the best PlayStation VR experiences to date. Because playing the demo, it really felt like you were there in that creepy mansion. Even though I played the demo numerous times before the VR support was even enabled, but just seeing it from the VR perspective, it was just so damn good. I'm like, holy crap. I feel like too, I know there's some people commenting on the original video. People are kind of concerned that it might be a little bit too much for them in terms of the creepy factor. But again, in terms of the horror games that came out, not only was Until Dawn Rush of Blood, even though that one's more of an on-rails roller coaster game, but a game like Resident Evil where you get to move around these different environments, find clues, get access to certain areas, and of course deal with whatever the hell is going to happen in the game. That one was just mind-blowing. I actually am going to be getting the collector's edition, just so you guys know, so definitely stay tuned for that one in January. But Resident Evil 7, I feel like it's going to be one of the best PlayStation VR titles, hopefully if the game stands up to it. I know this game has a lot of hype going for it, but if it does really well, then it's going to be like my #1 go-to VR game for sure. But in terms of what games have I played recently, or what games do I like, again, my top games will be the Resident Evil 7, even though it's not out, but I recommend downloading the demo, checking it out, or there's another version of the demo if you download the VR demo disc. It's just a little bit of a quick scene, but download the actual demo and experience that. Briggs is still an awesome game. Until Dawn Rush of Blood. Eagle Flight for sure. Pixel Gear is like a $10 game. Again, it's still the weakest game I feel to date, but it's actually 2 of them. The weakest games, of course, was the VR Luge, which is part of the PlayStation VR Worlds bundle, and the other one was it was a racing game. I can't remember the name on top of my head, but I felt like that one wasn't done quite well. It didn't look as good as the standard PlayStation 4 title, but in the VR experience, it looked quite terrible in my opinion. But other than that, like I said, I'm still enjoying the PlayStation VR. I'm hoping we have a strong lineup of games for 2017, which I know we do. Farpoint, Resident Evil, Ace Combat, and of course there's some other games that are currently not out yet, which we're going to hopefully see maybe in early 2017 or mid, give or take. But again, I'm still having a lot of fun with it, and I will be keeping you guys posted with more gameplay. If there's any recommendations, something that I have not covered yet, please let me know in the comment section down below. Like I said, it's hard for me to afford every single VR game that gets released, but I'm going to try to do my best to get to the main ones and maybe some side ones that may interest you. But if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time.